I guess. Perfect. All right, so first of all, thank you for being here. I am happy that it's some people, and I kind of think it reaches our goal of merging those groups and having people, more people to discuss with. So I have actually a lot of questions that remained unanswered during my PhD. So I will go through everything that I think is interesting about public space governance, and because it's where I wanted to focus now and share with you, and maybe we could build something together. Yeah. So yeah, I'm very happy to meet the people I didn't meet yet and to present and to discuss with you. So the presentation is not very long because I also want to leave space for discussion, questions, and everything. So, but don't hesitate to ask, and please interrupt me if needed. So I am Isabelle. I am originally from Brazil, and well, I don't know what to do first, but anyway, I am Isabelle. I'm from Brazil, and I just finished my PhD. So this is my contact, my Instagram and LinkedIn. I think all of you have already seen me on the group on LinkedIn. So this is a little bit what I'm going to present: introduction about myself, my PhD research, what I learned, and which are the remaining questions to be answered, and why public space governance, and the discussion, how can we move forward. So yeah, I am originally from Brazil, finished my PhD in the Netherlands. Now I worked at Rambol as a consultant for transport planning and mobility. I'm mostly focusing on line traces, GIS analysis. I have experience through my PhD on public participatory GIS and other database solutions. So yeah, and so I did the PhD in the University of Groningen in the Netherlands and the Department of Spatial Planning. My background is architecture, but I was always interested in urban studies since my bachelor's. And yeah, so if you like Instagram, you can follow me. This is the cover of my thesis, that it's called Understanding the Socio-spatial Aspects of Creativity in Public Spaces of Dutch University Campuses, the interplay between research-generated evidence and urban planning and design practice. So it's open access. The link is on my LinkedIn. If somebody needs, can email me and ask for it. I will be happy to send it. And basically what I wanted to share with you, which is related to public space, is the relationship between data, participation, policy, and decision-making. Because I think in public spaces, in urban design, I mean, my main reason that I want to focus on the governance side of things and the institutional side of things is that we have, I think we have so much of best practices, NATO guidelines, GALE guidelines, like guidelines of so many authors and so many sources. But I think what we need now is to really understand how the space comes about. The institutional side of things, the decision making, and I think we also need live in an era of data, so much availability of data, and how, to what extent we can make this data useful for us as planners. So this is more or less what I wanted to focus to present to you. So first, my PhD was mostly to try to understand what is a socio-spatial aspects of creativity, and for me is the relationship between the physical environment and perceived creativity. So in the chapters 2, 3, and 4 from my thesis, I basically try to understand this relationship. If you have questions about how this came about in this analysis, there will be questions popping out about how the data was done and how the data collection was done. I'm happy to answer questions, but I wanted to more move forward on the institutional side of things, but I'm happy to answer every question. So From chapters 2, 3, and 4, I investigated this relationship between the physical environment and creativity. And physical environment, I mean by the location of land use, points of interest, benches, like this more urban design basic things. So those 3 chapters, they generated research findings, which I call them empirical evidence, and that was through GIS data, participatory GIS. So I collected data with a web-based questionnaire called Maptionnaire, and with Maptionnaire you can export data to GIS and do all kinds of analysis if you want. And also in one of my chapters I use the space syntax, which is a network-based analysis that can also be used to calculate pedestrian movement, car movement, cycle movement. So happy to answer questions about that also. So with those research findings, I created 4 propositions, which was pretty much related to the results of those database investigation. And I presented those 4 propositions to practitioners. So I will give you details. So I just wanted to walk through how was my process. So it's more clear when I present the results. And this chapter 5 was divided in 2 parts. First, I wanted to understand how creativity in public spaces is understood as a status quo. And then after I presented those 4 propositions to practitioners, I wanted to understand if they felt through their perceptions that those data I presented to this, or this evidence I presented to them was considered credible, relevant, and applicable through their perspective. And I had so many interesting answers from practitioners, so I wanted to share them with you. Just a little bit of context. So my study cases were the inner city and science parks of Amsterdam, Groningen, Utrecht in the Netherlands. As you can see, the inner city campus is mostly located in this organically grown area of a European city. Dutch cities are very dense and compact. And the science parks is exactly the opposite. It is located in the outside skirts of the area. I mean, most of them are accessible by bike in between 20 and 30 minutes, still very good, but their spatial structure, as you can see, is very top-down, modernistic, and more car-based because they were created in the 60s, created and implemented in the 60s. So by collecting this data, I collected data in polygons, and I asked people, where are you creative with others in the campus? This was one of the examples of the data collection which I presented to practitioners. So then you can see the hotspots of creativity. So it could be inside and outside, because in the Netherlands, the weather is, I don't know, 6 months rain and cold. So a lot of the knowledge exchange do happen on the inside, but also on the interchange between inside and outside public space. So the relationship between the built environment and creativity, from every one of those cells, which were aggregated from the polygons that I collected the data, because people designed. I asked them where they were created, and they designed like a polygon through Maptionnaire. So I aggregated the data. I did the high and low, like so the volume of creative hotspots. And then from there, I calculated the distance from every cell to a land use. So how does this land use affect creativity? So these are the elements. So from every cell, I calculated the distance to buildings, green, places to sit, restaurants and canteens, streets and sidewalks. So I mostly followed these campus, very famous American, most Anglo-American literature on campus. So I selected which elements to calculate this distance through this literature. But then, so the question for my paper that wanted to check more the institutional side of things was always, how are social spatial specs of creativity currently applied in practice? So how are they seen? And how is the effectiveness of social space of the evidence I collected of social spatial aspects of creativity? So that was the two parts of this chapter. So just a little bit of background. I had the 16 participants from municipalities, master planners. So every campus has a planner in itself. So you have master planners, you have municipality people, because also in these campuses there are they share a public space with the municipality, so they are involved, so they usually work together. People from the municipalities, you have those master planners, people like architects or planners that work in the university, so they are responsible for the university, and you have people from the municipality involved in public spaces projects of campuses. So you have all kinds of people. You have the project managers, so people more involved in the application, so they are more involved in getting it done. You have people from real estate development, so they are more related to the management of the campus, the day-to-day management. You have a single project manager. For instance, this one was a specific project, and he was the project manager. So you had the professionals of all kinds of levels, and spoiler alert, that already affects their perception. And that's, of course, that's a conclusion I came in the end. But when I was recruiting them, I didn't really know that I would have so many different answers, just because they are in different roles in the project, in the projects. So these 4 propositions kind of are the most important highlights of the first 3 chapters that I explained, because the first 3 chapters is when I did the GIS analysis and I collected this evidence to present to practitioners. So those 4 propositions were like the most important things that I thought I should and could present to practitioners. So the first one is campus design, urban design, and public space guidelines might not be suitable for every campus. Context and individualities matter. The locations of built environment features can influence or inhibit creative encounters. High accessibility or high availability of spaces to walk does not mean high possibilities of creative encounters, and low accessibility does not mean low possibilities of creative encounters. And campus and public spaces typologies matter for creative encounters between people. So I will explain to you a little bit of each. So for the first one, it's exactly what I said in the beginning, that we have so many guidelines, we have so many best practices of everything, but when you try to put that into practice in a public space, it never really works, because it is an example of other project and other context. The number 2 is pretty obvious, is this basic urban design, land use. If everything is close to you, you're gonna have a vibrant space. Number 3 was very much related to the network analysis I did with pedestrian movement. So in many areas you had a high possibility of pedestrian movement, but then you didn't have the land use, you didn't have anything close by. So you had no creative encounters. And the other way around, you had not very accessible places, but you had a lot of land use, and then or organized activities, and then you did have a lot of creative encounters. And number 4, which is my favorite proposition, is because I started studying this inner city campus in the science park, thinking that the inner city campus would be an example for the science park, because it's close to everything and has this active land use. But in the results, we got it that the creativity in science parks flows so much better in between the buildings, mostly because the campus is a place to be creative or to share knowledge and by itself. So people are more encouraged to meet each other because they kind of have some sort of identification with each other because they are there for the same purpose. So just to show you a little bit, how was the question?
Isabelle, sorry.
Yes.
Can I just ask one quick question? Just the
Of
previous
course.
slide on number 3, where you mentioned accessibility. I assume when you say accessibility, you're just meaning that, you know, it's not talking about people with physical disabilities. This is just about anybody can get to the place, right? Yeah. I just wanted to make sure, because sometimes people use accessibility and they're talking about people with disabilities, which I was going to ask the question if you looked into that as well, but I'll let you go.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no, accessibility in this case is related to potential for movement. What you mean is a barrier-free places, like with ramps and this kind of adapted for yeah, no, it's not about that. It's really potential for pedestrian movement. So can I access that place walking, basically? So this is the interview question. So the introduction was mostly to ask, okay, do you know what socio-spatial aspect of creativity is? How do you think on creativity on the campus? But how do you see this relationship? And then from the first one is when I started presenting them my findings, and I asked in every proposition if they thought it was credible, relevant, or applicable. So this is how I coded. It is a little bit too academic, but if somebody wants details of it, I'm happy to explain. But basically, I categorize credibility, relevance, and applicability by high, medium, and low, and I coded like so. I used Atlas TI. So it's a software to categorize qualitative interview or qualitative interviews. Interview is always qualitative, but anyway, I did a thematic analysis, and Atlas TI helped me to categorize the teams and codes. And then we ended up with a reason why it was credible, relevant, and applicable. And then I ended up with 7 discussion points related to the propositions. So this is the result. Like I said, if you want more details, it is in the paper. You can ask questions. But basically, my message here is to try to understand why did they find certain aspects highly credible or low credible, or highly applicable and low applicable, because relevant, everybody thought it was very relevant to use data for projects. Everybody thought it was very relevant to think about creativity as an element that should be included in a project in the future. But credibility and applicability were the 2 aspects with a little bit more interesting discussions. So I also tried to understand the interrelationship between credibility, relevance, and applicability. And this is one of the quotes from my chapter, is that socio-spatial aspects of creativity were only considered at the decision-making level in strategic guidelines in just one case study. So high effectiveness of evidence composed by credibility, relevance, and applicability was only considered for evidence-based practice when aligned with practitioners' habits in planning. So basically, a certain aspect was only considered credible if it was aligned with something that they already seen. Credibility was related to something they already seen, and applicability they didn't really. Yes, yeah.
Hi, thank you. Did you attempt in any way to try and look at the temporal aspects of how people's perceptions, like I can imagine that in the space that the interactions can be very different at different times of day, or even by season and things like that? Did you try it all to look at this? And GIS isn't the best tool for that, actually. Like GIS, there's no time element to it. So
No.
like my okay, so
But
no, you just said whatever, you said everything together. And
yeah, my data collection happened, I forgot to say, but of course with the questions, the things start pop out. My data collection was in September and October of 2019, so no COVID in the game.
okay.
And I never asked my respondents about future. I never asked them about the past. I asked them, how do you feel at the moment?
Okay, and when you collected the data, did you have a timestamp on it? Like I did this interview at this time, or did you save that information?
No, you mean the open interviews, or you mean the ones that went to GIS, like the marks, like the polygon data, you mean?
Probably, well, both, but particularly the polygons, because I can imagine even the same person might perhaps have different perspectives at different times of day.
Yeah, that was different times of day, but I have it in a database, so I have the raw database that I could download from Maptionary, and that you have the time, but I never took time into consideration. So some interviews were done in the morning, some in midday, some in the afternoon. So
okay,
but I do have it. I do have it. If you want to discuss about it, I have it. But it was never into discussion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share a little bit. So the credibility part was related very much to the fact that it didn't really match with what they are experiencing to practice. So that was basically the reason why they wouldn't find what I presented to them credible, and was not aligned with their habits in practice, basically. Yeah, so most of the credibility perceptions were related to past experiences and best practice that they are used to. And applicability, a lot of them were very positive about using database solutions, but most of them don't work with that yet. So they couldn't see this kind of solution being used in a project that they are right now into. But they said, okay, maybe we could use for this and that in the future. So then we rated as low applicability because they didn't really feel like using it in the present. So we also realized that it depends a lot on where you stand in the project, on your perceptions of credibility and applicability. So these are a little bit of my remarks when I finished this chapter and also the thesis. So what is behind the urban design and what's behind the built environment? Fragmented policies, fragmented implementations, different times of projects and plans, participation and follow-up of practitioners in elaborating the research problem. So in my research, coming from academia, I also realized that if we come with a problem from academia, many times we don't know the reality, how the projects go and how things are run in practice. So I think we have to have a foot in both places. So digital processes in real life, how to change the paradigm. One of the things I perceived in those interviews is that we have so much data, but we don't have much people in municipalities that can actually handle this data, not only analyze it, but data management, data analysis, and of course, database solutions. And the integration of the design of public spaces needs an alignment of policy framing, research, goal achievement, and actors involved. Where to begin? These are questions that I put it out loud for us to discuss about this. And yeah, so why for me is public space governance something that I want to focus on is that because yes, we have a lot of yeah, we have so much data around, we have so much resources, but it's still a lot about the decision making. And the public spaces are in general the gathering of those decisions. Yes, so I think that's it. I just brought this graph from this source that is a public space governance paper, and I thought it made me think a lot how complex it can be. I haven't read everything, but it says a lot about how many levels of decisions you need to do, and what does go through the public space. And my question is, how do we move forward? And yeah, I would be happy to discuss with you, answer questions, and yeah, for us to reflect about this. It's not necessarily a problem or solution, but it's a very interesting topic to talk about it. And that's it.
Beautiful. Yes. Perhaps in parallel,